We've just been through a horrific week with more than 100 school children massacred in Pakistan, and then the lone wolf terrorist in downtown Sydney terrorizing that city, killing 2 people, the manager of the Lint coffee shop, and a young attorney who was a mother of 3. I mean, it's just a horrible story. And yet it could have been many, many, many more victims. Is this going to be the status quo for the future?
Well, I mean, it has been a terrible week. I mean, that incident in Pakistan was appalling, absolutely appalling, and there's no defence of any of that. I mean, well, first of all, my heart goes out to those people and the relatives of those victims. There can be no justification. It looks as though Pakistan, thankfully, is getting to grips with those tribal areas, and this is a response, they say, to that. I mean, there has long been controversy about the links between Pakistan secret services, particularly, and Muslim extremist secret services, but it looks as though, and for example, there has been a differentiation between, quotes, good Taliban and bad Taliban. But I mean, it looks as though the Pakistan authorities are getting to grips with this, and we've heard from the Prime Minister there that they, there is no differentiation now, and incursions into tribal territories are having an effect on ISIS or ICE, whatever you want to call it, and this is the response. So there is a good side, if you can see that in this. I mean, this is an organisation, ISIS, that doesn't allow, is opposed to equality, is opposed to gay rights, is opposed to women's education. They have to be stopped. And appalling things have happened as a result of these attempts to stop them.
I think it's interesting that the proximity of these 2 horrific kind of events, it points to the argument we had before. If you go back a few weeks when we were talking about the discussion between Bill Maher and Ben Affleck on their show about Islam, and it seems to me that this points out that Islam is, as a connecting tissue, is kind of a red herring, because the Sydney attacker, he had a criminal history, he was an accessory to murder, 22 counts of aggravated assault and what have you. So calling that a terrorist atrocity gives it a kind of ideological veneer that it doesn't really deserve. It was more about the guy's ego. I mean, but then, if you go to this attack that took place in Afghanistan by a splinter wing, as it's been called, because there has been a wing of the Taliban that's actually kind of criticised this attack quite strongly, and it's Jason Burke in The Guardian was suggesting that this is a result of a desperation of splinter groups within the Taliban. So the movement is divided by bitter internal competition. It's more about kind of commanders trying to seize power within that kind of regime. So it's really a sort of complex issue. I mean, I'm absolutely at a loss for words of how the West deals with this or responds to this, because there doesn't seem to be any kind of way of understanding a kind of justification for the heinous act that it was.
Well, you also run the risk of living in fear, and that is at some core what these organizations want. They want us in fear, and they want us to overreact, as we have done in the past. So if we demonstrate the ability to shut down an entire city, for example, like Sydney, for as long as it was shut down during the course of that whole incident, if the government of Peshawar in the northern part of Pakistan overreacts and starts bombing targets inside of Afghanistan, starts whatever, it just feeds into their narrative and allows the movement that they are claiming to represent to continue to build.
Because that's what they want, isn't it?
Exactly.
They want overreaction, and they want shutdowns of cities and all the rest of it, as we've seen.
I mean, even when the torture report came out last week, There was a brilliant cartoon. I forget who it was from, but it was one of the editorial cartoonists with a picture of a Taliban fighter holding up a piece of paper that says CIA torture report, and the words he says are "We won," because we got the U.S. to fundamentally change its moral high ground place and basically become as brutal as we are.
Yeah.
And this is also why Obama has kind of rode back on being critical of the torture report, because he's implicated in terms of his use of drones. So, from the left, there's been a lot of criticism about that way of dealing, or that implementation of foreign policy through the use of drones. So the moral high ground that he might have had is dissipated because of that.
Yeah, and again, I go back to where we started this program with, when you see, Dick Cheney, George Tenet, Michael Hayden, that's the former heads of the CIA. When you see the Bushies out there saying, well, 3 out of the last 4 attorneys general approved of what we were doing. Well, yeah, 3 of them were in the Bush administration. They were George W. Bush's attorneys general. So it becomes too clever by half what they're doing. They're really trying to justify their whole modus operandi during that time.
Yeah. Well, that's a good example, isn't it, of them not really answering a question. Well, 3 attorney generals, supported it, but of course the real issue there is they were attorney generals of a certain political slant, and they were placed there by somebody who was in a position and came from a certain political slant. So it's completely meaningless to say that.
And they were doing what they were told to do by their bosses, who was the president and the vice president at that time. Yeah. And it's interesting to see how Cheney and Tenet threw Bush under the bus. They both did in their interviews, in terms of saying that, well, it wasn't our fault. We were just doing as we were told. You were going to say something, Dario. Sorry.
I was just going to say that the problem that politicians have, I think, in reacting to something like this, is that they have to be seen to react. You know what I mean? They have to sort of show the people that there is going to be a reaction. There is going to be something that they will do in response to this. I mean, no politician can ever really say, well, we're going to do nothing, because there's really nothing we can do on a kind of, on a sort of response front, in terms of, whether it's bombings or whatever it might be, boots on the ground. If it goes that far, there's always got to be some kind of response, or seemingly got to be some kind of response given. And if ever a politician kind of says, well, we need to talk to the Taliban in response to something like this, then that's seen as kind of beyond the pale.